This is a Google Earth tutorial. We're going to talk about what Google Earth is, how it's different from Google Maps, and how this can be very beneficial for job planning. So just to start, we're going to do a quick overview of the program. And obviously, it's right there in the name, it's Google Earth. So this is the same company that does Google Maps. Most of the imagery is going to be the same. The pictures you see of the overheads as well as the street view are typically going to be the same thing that you see in Google Earth, but you can tell right away that we're looking at a very different kind of user interface. And one of the biggest differences, just from a technical perspective, is that Google Maps is something you run in a web browser, whereas Google Earth is something that you run on the computer itself. So it's an actual program that you downloaded. We'll get to that in a minute, how you install that. One of the biggest things about Google Earth that really is a bit more beneficial than Google Maps is first and foremost that it's very easy to create an individual file that you can then share with other people via email. These are called KMZ files. That's the file extension .kmz. So sometimes you might hear someone call them a KMZ. You can create maps in Google Maps that you can share, but the Google Earth has got a little bit better navigation, a little bit easier to add push pins and notes, measure distances, that kind of thing. So you can see here we're staring at the Earth. It defaults to the United States. And above and beyond what you can do for work, there's some kind of fun stuff you can use for personal. I mean, I'm sitting here in my house recording this during the COVID-19 crisis. So since I can't go anywhere, I can actually do some sightseeing right here. So I can come in, I can select the Eiffel Tower, for example, and the program is going to spin me around, take me right down into Paris, and can't quite grab a baguette and a coffee, but I can play around, zoom in and out on different things. We've also got St. Peter's Basilica as another example, where not only do we have satellite imagery, but people have actually gone in and modeled these buildings, and we can actually see a three-dimensional representation of, in this case, the Cathedral of St. Peter's. And above and beyond that, we can see other things that may not be specifically, around the world. Here is the White House, which I find interesting that they actually don't have the White House in 3 dimensions. All the buildings around it are. They must think that there's some way that you can use that detrimentally. So here's Washington, D.C. And it doesn't have to be famous buildings. It could be something much more pragmatic. So we can come in here, look at TMI branch. This is the Long Beach branch. So when you're sitting around bored, you can spy on all your fellow branch and regional managers. You can zoom right in on their offices. You can count the trucks that were in the yard that day. You can actually see that the program's actually modeled all of our buildings here in 3 dimensions. And if you get tired of looking around on planet Earth, you can even come in here. You can look at, let's say, we can look at the moon. Probably not your TMI office here just yet, but give it time. And they also have Mars. Really not certain how this relates to traffic control, but something fun to show your friends or show your kids. Obviously, the engineers over there at Google have some spare time on their hands, just like we all do in the current state of the world. So the first thing you're going to need to do is actually make sure you have the program. Like I said before, this is not something that is web-based. It has to be actually installed. So pull up your web browser, type in Google Earth, and should come up here right at the top. And so here is their web page. Now, they're constantly updating this program, and currently their generic version is a web-based interface. which I'm sure is fine and good for most people. However, we want the one that's on our computer so that we can save these files and have them much easier access. So we need to come up here to the Earth versions, and we want Google Earth Pro on desktop right here. It's going to bring this up. We want to download that file, accept and download, and you can see down here in the bottom, it's going to download that exe. If I show in folder, probably in your downloads, unless you have it set up to download somewhere else, here is the icon or the application to run the installer. Double click on that, and it's going to run you through a pretty typical Windows installation process. I've already got the program installed, so I really don't want to let this finish. Once the installation is complete, you will have a little circle icon here, gray, dark and light gray lines, little wavy lines. It usually shows up on your desktop. I have pinned mine to my taskbar so that I have it ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, the first time we run the program, we're going to want to make a few tweaks to the settings. So I come down here, click on my Google Earth icon. It's going to load the program. Starts off out at a distance, spins you around a little bit, and here's our main screen again. Now, there's quite a bit on the screen. We'll get into each one of these things in detail, but simplistically, over on the top right here, we have our navigation buttons, which you don't actually need to use all that much. The mouse buttons and the cursor wheel on your mouse, assuming you have one, it's going to allow you to move around most everywhere you need to go. Across the top, we have some tools up here to draw and measure. We'll get into those in detail later. We have some layers up here. I've got a few created already. The sightseeing tour comes with the program. Other than that, this one will most likely be blank on yours because you haven't created anything yet. And then down here in the bottom, we have the data layers. And typically, when you install the program, it's going to come with all of this stuff turned on. And we're going to probably want to turn off a lot of this. Part of it is it takes a lot of bandwidth to download. You see clouds. You can see all of these little funny icons floating around. So we're going to start off, and we're going to turn off just about everything. We're going to leave on the borders and places. That's things like city names and state boundaries. We obviously want to see those most often. And we want to leave on the roads. Pretty important for the kind of work we're doing. That's really why we're here. We're going to turn off the 3D buildings right now, weather, gallery, global awareness, and the terrain. So when I do that, my map gets a lot cleaner. When I zoom in here on Los Angeles, I can see that it's Los Angeles because I have my borders and labels turned on. If I were to turn that off, all of those things go away. Likewise, I can see all the freeways and some of the major streets here. If I turn off my roads, then those go away as well. One of the things that we do want to do here quickly is go up into our tools and options. And on the navigation tab, there is a navigation section that talks about tilting while zooming. So to show you what they're talking about here, if I come in on Los Angeles, and if I'm using my mouse wheel right now to zoom in and out. So if I just keep zooming, when I get down to a certain point, the map starts to tilt a little bit. It didn't do it significantly, but we're not looking quite straight down anymore. And if I hit the R key on my keyboard, which is used to recenter everything, it's going to rotate me due north is straight up, and it's going to look straight down. You can see how much off we were. So I want to come up here. Normally speaking, when I'm moving in and out and I'm drawing a plan, I don't want the earth to be tilting on me. I want to be always looking straight down. And so for most of the time, I'm going to want to place this to do not automatically tilt while zooming. Now when I zoom all the way in, I don't ever change my orientation. I'm always looking straight down. The other ones that are somewhat significant are these layers for 3D buildings, and terrain. So here's downtown Los Angeles. I'm going to tilt my camera up and zoom back in on downtown. You'll notice that obviously everything is real flat. I have all my terrain and my 3D buildings turned off. And again, when you're drawing a traffic plan and you're dropping pins, this is normally what you want. You don't want the fancy three-dimensional buildings and the terrain to be interfering with the placement of your signs, barricades, airboards, and things like that. However, you may want to see these 3D buildings sometimes. It could have to do with you want to understand the situation, the line of sight. So if I turn this on, then you can see these things start to draw in. These also do take quite a bit of bandwidth, so it's going to really slow down how long it takes to render the screen. So typically you don't want to have that on all the time. It's just taking a lot of time as you move around. So the other one is the terrain layer down here on the bottom left. And this is actually something relatively new to Google Earth. It's really nice that they now give us the option to turn this off and on. And I will show you how that can be something that affects the way that we see the roads that we're drawing on. So I've got two samples up here on the top left. I have a bridge up on PCH and I have a bridge down in Long Beach. So if I come down here to my Long Beach bridge, and I have my viewport saved at an angle to illustrate this. So right now I have terrain and 3D buildings turned off, and so it's a very flat plane. Now if I were to turn the terrain on, it's going to now make my road look very silly because the ground is trying to illustrate the topography of this part of the world, and it's then drawing the satellite image right down onto that terrain. But obviously the bridge is something that doesn't follow the terrain. It actually extends across. Now, in this case, if I turn on the 3D building, it actually is going to then re-render this correctly. So this could be a very useful tool if I'm trying to understand, will a vehicle be able to see around the corner under that bridge, something like that. Now, if I was to come back here and turn those 3D buildings off again and look straight down on my road, it's a little bit subtle, but you can see that the bridge is kind of kinked a little bit to the right. So if I turn that terrain layer off, you'll notice that everything goes back to being nice and straight. So if I was using this, for example, to trace in an AutoCAD or a drafting program to make a traffic plan, I want my road to be nice and straight. If I have my terrain turned on, things may not be quite perfect. Now, my other example is this bridge up here on PCH. So we can fly up here real quick. Again, right now I have terrain and 3D buildings turned off. So you can see Highway 1 here. It's all flat from our current perspective. If I use again the R key, I'm looking straight down with north straight up, I can see the geometry of how this roadway is curving. If I send it back to my slightly angled view and I turn terrain on, it's going to get real confused. So obviously that road does not drive down into the ravine the way that the program is showing. However, in this example, if I turn 3D buildings on, it doesn't change. For whatever reason, the program doesn't recognize that as a structure. And if I look straight down, it may or may not actually impact much depending upon the topography. And you can see that the road doesn't move very much. But again, for most of what we're going to be doing, you're probably going to want the 3D buildings turned off and the terrain turned off so that you're getting a true flat top-down look-down image.